let's start now. What I'll do is share screen. You know what? Before I actually start that.
It says to sign in. Is there a sign in for this?
Sign in.
It's asking me to sign in for the session. But I can see you, so I don't know.
Yeah, you're in the session.
Can you hear us?
There's
Yes.
like a meeting code
Okay.
that appears.
It'll be fine.
Yeah.
It'll be fine.
Okay.
You're there. You're Joanne.
No, I'm Joanne.
You're in.
Marlies.
Okay.
Okay.
Hey, Marlies.
Hey. Hi, Dan.
How are you?
We're great. It's nice to see you guys.
Same here. Nice to see you, Alon, also.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, guys. Let's start. Okay. And the idea today is to have a talk about Israel and the perspective of Israel. And that's always a little bit complicated because Israel is you know what? This is actually true for all countries in the world. We always look at our country as two different things, what it is and what we aspire it to be. And we always kind of move between the two seamlessly, not always sure which one we are talking about. Every country has that. What we aspire to be is a little bit, you know what, even that every country has. We go a lot to the past. Every country goes to a past which was golden and tries to say we'll be there once more. Israel is very much like that. But when you came to Israel, one of the things, I guess, except the ancient part of Israel, the history of Israel, the religious story of Israel that attracts so many people, people a lot of times are surprised and happy to see how modern Israel is. Israel is both the ancient and billed as the future. And you walk around Tel Aviv or Jerusalem and you find great restaurants and nice bars and beaches and technology, development. So there's always this tension between these two things, right? And a lot of times what we do is we gloss over the things we don't like in what is with what we actually want it to be. There's lots of dents in our countries, wherever we are, Israel or any other place in the world, and we tend to gloss over our problems by saying, oh, that's on the way for us to be great. So we don't need to look at this little problem. It's not defining who we are, right? In the American story, gun violence or abortions, both of them are issues that don't define what America is. They're bad, they're issues that are making people very emotional, but they're glossed over. Israel the same. So I want to try and talk about the Israel that is, not the aspirational Israel, in order to understand what's happening. And in the end, we'll try and add that aspirational. What do we actually aspire Israel? What do we want it to be? Okay, so that's kind of like the tone. I'll start with this presentation, and we'll stop in the middle to open up for like a bit of a discussion. Okie dokie?
Yep.
So,
Yeah, sounds good.
Okie dokie.
I'll start with like a little summary of last time. We ended with this idea of Hamas being so popular. And the Hamas starts with it being a charity organization, what you call in Arabic a dawah organization, schools, so many things that it does for its society. but it also is a religious political organization with a clear strategy of what it wants. And first of all, it's a religious organization. Its history and its theory is based on religion, right? Their leaders are religious people. It's very important in their story. And they lead that. They are the ones that hold the story of religion and through it, redemption. And we all know how important religion is in our lives and in defining our cultures, even if not specifically in our personal lives. The second thing is prisoners. The return of prisoners is incredibly important as Israel holds so many Palestinian prisoners for things from murderers, that we are holding about 540 murderers in jail, to everything, to the smallest types of crimes. And they're all held in military jails. So for them, the return of prisoners is incredibly important. The head of Hamas in Gaza sat in Israeli jail for 22 years. And when he was released, he vowed to release all the Palestinian prisoners. Not how I understand him, it's what he actually said. And the third thing for Palestinians and the Hamas, what's so important is land. Returning the land, right? And this is a theme that's incredibly important. When you add a religion to these two other themes, you get a organization that's giving people an idea of change and to go towards somewhere, but having a basis on welfare. The change that they want to get to is mediated always through violence. So all that we have said until now has to be always remembered that the way to achieve it is through a lot of violence, and violence at civilians. That's their specialty. Unlike other Palestinian organizations, violence towards civilians. On the right, we ended with this photo. On the right, this Hamas militant terrorist walking into a kibbutz with his gun, shot from a GoPro of another Hamas terrorist, and the two kids. And we asked, are the Gazans Hamas? In this picture, it's pretty clear. It's very easy to make the distinction who's who. Children are children. A Hamas operative with a gun and a green bandana, that's a terrorist. There's no problem making that distinction. But we were talking about how embedded the organization is in society because it gives the population everything they need. If you look at this picture, and this is an aerial photo from about 3 weeks ago, when Israel ordered, actually probably already 4 weeks ago, when Israel ordered all the residents of northern half of the Gaza Strip to move to the southern half of the Gaza Strip. A population of about 1 million people had to move that 8 miles down. In the picture that you see, what looks like a weird kind of oozing, brownish, reddish kind of coming down, it is actually thousands of people walking. These are Gazans, and they're stopping at a point where the Israeli army is. And what the Israeli army needed to do at that moment is decide who is Gazan and who is Hamas. And
oh my God.
this is how it looks on the ground. Are these Gazans or are these Hamas?
How do you distinguish?
How do you
How
distinguish?
do you tell who is who?
Right? Israel had to do this with practically everybody walking through, 1 million people. How do you decide if this woman, the man, the young man, the children, the elder, who is who? What is what? It's very hard. Definitely if you don't make a distinction between a fighter and a supporter. You don't know what's in the hearts of these people. This this is the border with Gaza. This is what the 7th of October overwent. Between Israel and Gaza, there's a border and a border fence with observation towers on the Israeli side, fences. The fence goes underground for anywhere between 40 and 250 feet deep, concrete, because we were scared that they will dig underground with tunnels.
Right.
Remember in 2014, there were attempts by the Palestinians by the Hamas to dig underground into Israel. And this fence cost $4 billion in construction. It has observation towers, it has all kinds of cameras, it has multiple fences, it has a no-go zone, it has observation towers even in the Palestinian side in Gaza. This is an incredible amount of money at stopping them. And if you build a fence with somebody, he will learn to build a ladder that's 1 foot higher than your fence. If you build a fence higher, then he will learn how to dig underneath it. And if you build a concrete wall, in the end, he'll understand that you put so much effort into all the technology that brute force can just get through. And that's what happened on the 7th of October. Brute force. They got through our defenses. What were our defenses? What does Israel do? One, you have those border defenses, but majority of the defense is actually coming through intelligence. When you don't know what's on the other side, you need that intelligence to help you navigate. What you see here, cameras, drones, these are the simple drones. We have in Israel a whole variety of them. You can see every person in Gaza as long as they're outdoors or on a roof. And all over the Gaza Strip. Now, because there's so much more activity of these drones, you can actually hear them from time to time above us in Jaffa as they're flying back and forth. Have a weird humming sound to them. Probably the majority of intelligence comes from what we call SIGINT, signal intelligence. That's everything from landlines to telephones to cell phones to computers to radio to electromagnetic frequencies coming off of things. It's signal intelligence, and this is actually the single largest unit within the Israeli military. Our signal intelligence unit, it's called A200. And they're actually the second largest signal intelligence unit in the world after the NSA. They're incredibly important. So you collect a lot of data like that, what's happening in Gaza. Lastly, I don't know, maybe you've seen this before.
No, we did. Yeah.
Sorry, I wanted to go back for 1 second. And yeah, human. Fauda is human intelligence, having people inside. Israel has all of these working. And it didn't stop them. This is enormous effort put into it, and it didn't stop it. When you collect intelligence, I was in the military, and like all Israelis, my military service was in Navy intelligence. You collect intelligence. Intelligence collection is like just, opening up a big bag and throwing lots of things in. If you're looking for things, you will find there's so much information flooding in. Once all that information floods in, you need to start creating narratives out of it because you have very small data points. You need to start putting them one to get to the other, right? Some corroborate one another, some add information, some are useless. So the majority of the work is trying to make sense. And within the intelligence world, you separate the information into two groups, intent and capabilities. And that's what we have here, right? The guys with the guns, this is Hamas's elite unit, the Nukhba unit. And we want to understand what are their capabilities. So you look at their uniforms, look at what they're using, look at their guns, look at their tactics, look at their drills, look how many people there are, and you get a sense of capabilities. On the other side is intent, which is always a lot harder. That is, what is the intent of the leaders that will use the capabilities? That's very hard to get to. You need to get into somebody's head to get intent. So that's a lot of information flowing in with little snippets of information. This man said that thing to that person. This man did that, and that means that. You're collecting a lot of information. On both these fronts, the Israeli intelligence failed. We believe their capabilities were lower than they were. We really did. We believe their capabilities were lower, and we believe there were less operatives, less Hamas trained terrorists. We also believe that only the trained terrorists could do this. What turned out on the 7th of October, that they could gather a lot of other people. We know that the Hamas offered people houses if they will cross over into Israel. Cross over into Israel, they were told a couple of hours before, and you will get a house afterwards. An enormous prize. So we didn't know that their capabilities could encompass much larger groups of people. Secondly, their intent. Israel believed that Hamas's intent was to become more and more corrupt and care less and less about their people, and therefore be willing to receive that minimum amount that Israel allowed to get in. And we'll talk about exactly what that is in a minute, right? Turns out, at least the commander in Gaza had different intent. Yahya Sinwar, the guy in the picture who's doing a V sign, that's the head of Hamas. He probably knew about the plan of the 7th of October, but most analysts would say that he wasn't in the know-how when it will happen and how it will happen. So the intent isn't always clear. Even if you get the intent of one person, it doesn't mean you get the intent of another. And Israel got the wrong intent, understood it wrongly. This is the result. The biggest shock to Israel and Israeli society is the kidnapping of around 250 people. Out of them, there were close to 70 of them were, close to 40 of them were foreign laborers, mainly Thai, but coming from other places as well. Amongst them, children, adults, and elderly. The oldest was 83 years old. The youngest was 10 months old to be kidnapped. And after the ceasefire and the release of about 110 people, we're still left with about 130 people in captivity. It's unimaginable. It's very, very, very difficult to even try and imagine what that means to be in captivity there. But also you have to understand, for Israeli society, such a photograph is very easy to put yourself into it. These are people in their homes that were kidnapped away. And this is an incredible tragedy, but it's also an incredible break with your government. The agreement with your government is that it protects you from somebody coming from the outside. That's the most basic agreement you have. Right? We're willing to accept violence inside our society. We say that the police should do better work, but we aren't willing to accept violence coming from outside our country. And that's what.
Ilan, may I ask something really quickly? Sorry to interrupt you, because there on the news there were many discussions about Israelis talking to Saudi Arabia and Abraham Accords, and then they were remarking on Palestinians being left behind, and if it could cause some problems with Palestinians. So why wasn't Israel actually really paying attention to something like that, that talking to Arab countries would provoke Palestinians?
Hamas.
Hamas.
Okay,
Hamas.
that's a very good question, right? It goes to this idea of intent. If they're saying that they will be provoked, if Palestinian polls have been showing clearly over the last couple of years the rise in support in violent action towards Israel in order to get goals. And if we have been hearing them say that they will not allow this accords and these normalization to continue, why weren't we ready? The question is easy in hindsight, because we know today what were we supposed to be ready for. When you're in threat, you try to be ready for everything, knowing that you can't. That was the conception. We couldn't imagine this, right? You'll probably hear in the next whatever months or whenever reports about the Israeli intelligence. We actually knew very, very well. We have a officer in the A200 unit who wrote a report, and this is not a young officer, this is a lady who's been 20 years in service, who wrote a report about the Hamas planning to attack Israel and break the fence and come also with what do you call those Delta gliders, right, into Israel. And they saw Hamas doing drills of attacking kibbutzes.
Oh.
When you get information, you need to weigh it versus capabilities. And Israel thought the capabilities weren't such. Why did Israel think like this, right? That's a big question. Why is this the way you think? So we'll touch on in a second on how did we get to the concept of what do we believe are the relationship with Gaza. And that has a lot to do with our politics. And that's the next bit, and that will answer more of what you were asking. And to end this point about Gaza, you can see here in this map, northern and southern Gaza Strip, the blue line cutting through it is Wadi Gaza, and everybody on the northern half was told to move to the southern half. And the picture with this little pamphlet in Arabic is what the Israeli Air Force dropped over northern Gaza, and that shows them where they have to go. And today, Israel has more or less control over northern Gaza. There are very few people still living there, even though there is pretty heavy fighting happening in some of the areas in the part of Gaza City closer to Israel, in the big refugee camps there. But there's also fighting happening in Khan Yunis, in the southern half of Gaza. Israel has gone in there with ground forces, specifically because that's the area where the leadership of Hamas in Gaza is from. And there's an attempt at the moment to try and find these specific leaders and capture them.
Are they in Gaza?
Sorry?
Are they in Gaza or are they someplace else? The leaders.
I don't know. I'll start with that. Yeah. We believe that they are, because Gaza at the moment doesn't have clear communications to the outside world. It really is closed off. And we know it's still being led very clearly, right? So we believe that they are still there. Who exactly of them is there and who's not, that's something that Israel's intelligence hopefully knows. They didn't share that with me yet. What is Israel trying to do in Gaza? What are our goals? And these are the goals according to the Israeli government. There was a government decision, right? Passes into kind of like law in Israel when you declare war, and you have to explain why are you going to war, and it gave 3 reasons or goals to this war. First of all, toppling Hamas rule and its military capability. It came out in Hebrew. I couldn't find the English translation, so this is my translation. Right? They use the word toppling, Hamas rule and its military capability. That is something that's attainable, not easy and not fast, but it is attainable. There's a limited number of rockets. There's a limited number of guns. There's a limited number of weapons. There's a limited number of fighters, right? It is attainable. It takes a long time, and it garners lots of casualties, both from Israeli soldiers and military, as we are seeing today. Over 100 Israeli soldiers died in the battle, and with collateral damage, right? In order to make this feasible, right, you use the Air Force. And Air Force is not an exact weapon. As smart a bomb is, it's still big and it has a big radius. And that's how we have 15,000 dead in Gaza. That does include also Hamas fighters, but a large, more than the majority of it, is civilians. Second, removing the threat of terror from Gaza towards Israel. That's how the government put it. That is a very, very hard thing to attain for many reasons. First of all, terror is something that is very hard to pinpoint. One person feels fear of one thing and another person feels fear of something else. Secondly, removing the threat of terror. That's something that also has to do with what threatens you and what do you feel that threatens you. If it's Hamas that threatens you, or is it Palestinians? Is it anybody of a certain age? This is a very, very hard thing, right? This, I would say very simply, is a media goal. This is a goal you put into your goals in order to have something to say to your people who are very scared. I'll remove the threat. And that's something that can't fully be done, right? I guess nobody in the world feels there's no more threat from radical Islam, even though ISIS doesn't really exist anymore. We all believe the threat is there. And third, this is how Israel put its supreme effort in returning all kidnapped Israelis. This is how it was put, supreme effort. It wasn't put with a definitive verb, not like toppling, removing. Here they had to qualify it by saying supreme effort in returning all kidnapped Israelis. This has to do, on the one hand, with realism. It's not in your hands always when you have people who are kidnapped. And secondly, it has to do with what's the price you're willing to pay for returning a kidnapped person.
So
As
that
long as
means,
the other side wants something, the question is, are you willing to pay it? If it's $1, $10, 100, 1,000, a million, 10 million, 100 million, at some point, the number is too high, right?
Well,
And
the head of Hamas was released after 20 and some years from prison in exchange, right? Also,
he was exchanged, the last big
Right.
prisoner exchange happened with Hamas in Gaza, who kidnapped a soldier in 2014,
right.
Gilad
And it was
Shalit.
controversial, right? It
He
was
sat in,
controversial that the
he was
price was too
kidnapped
high.
for 5 years, and throughout negotiations, it took a very long time. Hamas did not change the initial position of what it wanted. It took about 5 years for the Israeli government to get to a place where it said, okay, for that one soldier, we are willing to release 1,073 Palestinian prisoners. Israel wants to change that calculus. That's part of the reason that it's not releasing all Hamas prisoners or all Palestinian prisoners, because it says it's too high a price. And as we could see, you released prisoners and they become the head of Hamas in
Right.
Gaza, right? Okay. Do you know what? Maybe before I go on, you know what? I'll end with this little thing, right? Military power versus diplomacy. We live in a world where the global balance of power is such that military is so much stronger than diplomacy. And not long ago, Henry Kissinger passed away. He lived in the world where there was a lot of military power, but there was a lot of respect also for diplomacy. We live in a bit of a different world, but there was a American ambassador to Israel called Martin Indyk in the 90s.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book, and in it he has a chapter that he calls Elastic Moments, if I'm not mistaken. He says in diplomacy, it's very hard to move things because you can't use power in the same way. It's very hard to move. It's military, you use power. Diplomacy, it's much more gentle. But he says there are moments in time in history that things become more elastic, and suddenly a little push makes a much bigger difference. Usually it has to do with wars. Before or after a war, things change a bit and things suddenly become more elastic. We are coming up to that moment here in Israel. But I'll stop here and we'll do a little bit of a break, and then we go back into what's happening in Israel's politics, if you have any questions.
Actually, you know, this is maybe marginal, but there were these two women from Evanston, so the suburb of Chicago, who were hostages on October 7th, and they were rather quickly released before all the other hostages. And really, nothing is really said about it. So I'm just wondering, what was the process involved in their release? It had to be something different than
How much money was
too much
involved in?
money actually probably was involved in it.
No, this is a very complicated thing when you have this kidnappees, release, and the exchange. Nobody knew in the beginning what is the price, what is the exchange rate between one kidnappee to what Israel gives back. Different kidnappees are also, this is very sad to say, worth different things. Hamas got a lot of criticism for kidnapping children, right? All the children were released except two children at the moment who are, Hamas has said, are dead. But all the children were released. Children, everybody in the world thought that's not legitimate. Palestinians in polls think that's not legitimate. They just don't believe that it actually happened. There were two kids, twins, 3 years old, 52 days in Hamas captivity. So the question is, how do you make a sense of who's who? A man, a soldier, an elderly, a child, 18, 19, 20 years old. What Hamas did in the beginning was released a few people sporadically. In all likelihood, it has to do with their health situation. And all the first people who were released had double citizenship, both Israeli citizenship and another citizenship. So what the Hamas did in the beginning is checking, so can I release Americans and get points for that? Can I release only the women? Or maybe I should, it wasn't money, right? When the release happened, it happened through a negotiated deal in very well-known back channels. And they negotiated the deal to release at least 10 women per day. And in return, Israel will release all the women and children who are held in Israeli prisons and increase dramatically humanitarian aid.
And another question that I have, and you may plan to talk about it, is why it took so many hours for Israel to react to that attack?
That's simple, because nobody could believe it could happen. When you can't believe it could happen, it takes longer to react. Secondly,
This is not so easy.
No,
You
no, no,
know
no,
what
I'm not
happened
finished
and
yet. Wait a
you
second.
don't believe it?
No, I'm not finished yet. You couldn't expect it. What Hamas did is not just attack the civilians. Hamas attacked also 4 army bases. And among the 4 army bases, it broke into 3. And into one, it was the army base that was the command of all the vision capabilities on the fence. You have one base where sit all the people who run all the cameras. They succeeded in getting in, and a big number of the people who are hostages are from that base. So they broke down Israeli ability to see. Second army base they got into was Israel's Southern Command. That's the command base that commands everything that happens around Gaza. And for almost half a day, there were heavy fighting inside that base with a couple of hundreds of Hamas operatives. When that happened, that breaks the movement of information. That was something that nobody expected to happen. So there was no redundancy. One of my good friends is an Air Force pilot. He flies spy planes. But he told me his friends who are helicopter pilots, Apaches, these sorts, were on their cell phones getting WhatsApp telling them where to fly to because there's Hamas there in the beginning. When you succeed in cutting these very basic things and there's no redundancy, because you can't even imagine a situation where you need a redundancy, it takes a long, long time to build that flow of information back. That's the reason.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
Let me begin. Is there a possibility that this attack might have been prevented if Israel had not had a blockade around the Gaza Strip? Also in that question, did that blockade also increase the chances that Hamas would become militant?
Okay, great. I love both of the questions. I'll start with the second one first. First of all, Hamas has always been militant. started off as a welfare organization in 1973. By 1985, they became a militant organization. In 1987, they changed their emblem from scripture, a piece of scripture, that was the emblem. They changed it to a sign that had the Golden Dome in Jerusalem, two big swords on it. Okay? They became a militant organization. Their militancy got higher and higher and stronger over time. Could this be prevented through a different diplomatic way of doing things, by not having a blockade or so, right?
Right.
The easy answer is yes, but that's an answer that's as easy as no. These counterfactuals, these taking a one point in time and changing it, we can see and we can track what does a blockade do. A blockade stops bringing in contraband material. Turns out that didn't work. They had guns, they had explosives, they had these gliders, they had materials for rockets. Just today there were alarm sirens, not in Tel Aviv, but in where my in-laws live, right, of rockets from Gaza. So apparently the blockade didn't help there. We can also see how the blockade, right, made Gaza more dependent on Israel. And that's what we'll talk about in a second. It's not just the blockade.
But didn't the blockade also cause a humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip?
Yes, it does, right? But that causes it, and Hamas corruption causes it. And Hamas using money coming in for aid for military buildup. All of these things cause it. We can single out one of them and we can say, yes, this had an effect. But all of these things have an effect as well. When you lead your country, Hamas country, it's not really a country, with a religious outlook which says that we will be victorious and every sacrifice we make takes us towards that victory. Every dead person is counted as a positive, not a negative. Every dead citizen is something positive happening, not a negative thing. So you're right, but I prefer to see, first of all, what are the effects of things that happened? And don't worry, I'm going to give you my take on probably what I believe is Israel's biggest mistake in this thing. But Israel's biggest mistake isn't the only mistake in the game. Hamas being what it is, that's a great mistake in the game. It's an organization that doesn't want to live together.
This organization, they want to kill all Jews, right? They want to take back Israel and to make it Palestine.
Okay, Hamas has a charter. It's an organization. They have a charter. They published it in the 9th of December, 1987. It's very well known for anybody who studies like Middle East, Israel-Palestine conflict. And their 1987 charter says we will not recognize Israel. Israel is a colonial power led by European colonial interests, and the Jews are the root of all evil. And they have no place in Palestine. We will allow them to live under a Muslim rule, like they always did, as protected people. This is a Muslim kind of language to it. In 2017, not very long ago, the Hamas leadership made a new charter. And they changed the language very dramatically. They toned down the religious language very much. And they said, we will recognize Israel. Right? It is there. We will not make peace with Israel, but we can get to a long-term ceasefire. There's a specific Arab term for a long-term ceasefire, hudna. We can get to a hudna with Israel, right? If Israel is willing to forgo Gaza and the West Bank. So they suddenly didn't demand all of Israel. They changed. That was one of the reasons we believed that their intentions are towards that rather than what we saw on the 7th of October. So no, they don't want to kill all Jews, right? But when you ask somebody today, what do you think of Israel? They would say everybody should go. Ask them in a point in time where they're in a better mood, let's say, the economy is better, prospects are better. We see that changes as well. This kind of talk, the other should disappear, rises when these situations are. But they have, Hamas doesn't breed any positive intent towards Israel. What does every person in his heart feel? I don't know. We know that there is a Hamas leader. The Hamas has a body of a council of 12 leaders, 9 leaders, whatever. 3 from Gaza, 3 from the West Bank, and 3 who are not living in this area. And so their representative who's sitting in Lebanon just a day ago said, we should have a permanent ceasefire with Israel. We should stop the fighting now with Israel, and we will be able to get to a 2-state solution. Whoa. 2 days ago, Musa Abu Marzouk said it on Lebanese state TV. I can't pinpoint them, right? Last thing I'll say about this, I, as an Israeli, see the 7th of October as a horrendous, violent and vile, murderous terrorist attack. But I do recognize that Palestinians see it as an attack towards their freedom. They just say that it's okay to kill children. That I agree with, but that's their perspective. The only way to get the yoke of occupation off of them is through military power. And this is a good segue to our next part, because this is where we'll talk about one of the reasons they don't see a non-military, non-terrorist way of reacting.
Elad, can I ask one question before you move?
Sure, Jan.
A lot of stuff of what I've read, and I think a lot, obviously everyone is pretty, it's been on the front page of New York Times since October 7th. Every day. There's nothing with Ukraine at all. Did this happen because Saudis and were going to be recognizing Israel, and that basically they were not really bringing the Palestinian question in their forefront? And 2, does Netanyahu, is he the right person, given what I've read previously, and I don't know if that's changed, but most people in Israel have blamed this on him. Is he the right person to be leading your country now? And you can say you'll answer this later or whatever, but.
Yeah, let's start with the second question. That's very easy. No, Netanyahu, this is my personal view, and in this I'm with a majority of polled Israelis. We do not trust Netanyahu anymore. That's the easy one, and we'll talk about it in a minute. What you asked first, You know, I'll answer it in the next part. I'll find a way to put that in. Okay, so yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. It's me, my mind kind of thinking over it.
Yeah, 2 a.m.
2 a.m. That's right. Yeah.
Still working. Yeah.
2 a.m. in Israel now.
Where is my? I don't see the cursor suddenly.
So I have one more question.
Sure, Jack.
If I can. In our media, you can hear or read about Israeli settlers in West Bank shooting Palestinians. How does it fit into the whole picture?
All right.
You know what? That's exactly how this is second part of what Joanne asked in a sense. Settler violence and international movement. That's what if we're looking at it from Palestinian perspective for a second. From a Palestinian perspective, the deal with Iran and the Emirates, the Abraham Accord, sorry, not Iran, the Emirates, Abraham Accords, Morocco, and so forth, even Sudan, and now getting closer to Saudi. Palestinians saw that as a very big threat. Right. The biggest protector to their stance was always that the neighborhood of Israel wasn't willing to forego a solution for the Palestinians. If that goes, then their trump card went away, their biggest backer.
Right.
And no doubt, the reason that the 7th of October happened now, that is one of the reasons. This is one of the reasons, it's not the only, but it is one of the reasons. They said so as well, even though the second question is exactly the reason that Palestinians say that they went on this rampage on the 7th of October. If you ask Palestinians, they were polled, and the number one reason that they gave is attacks by Israel on Al-Aqsa Mosque, on the Golden Dome, allowing more and more Jews to go up there. Today, there's areas where Jews pray there. They believe they're going to take away the holiest site for Muslims in the whole land of Israel, Palestine, from the Muslims. And the second thing they say is settler violence. This is a retaliation for all the violence from settlers. This is what Palestinians say, right? This is also the reason that the name of this attack by the Hamas is the Al-Aqsa shower. It has to do with protecting the holy sites and protecting it from the Israeli settler movement. And it is a very, very big problem. One other reason for the attack to happen at this moment is this. Our government at the moment, am I sharing the screen with you?
Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
At the moment, we have Israel's most far-right government. This isn't, just my political view. It is just a statement of fact. Everybody in this government would be termed right and way right of center. There's not even a centrist party in there. Benjamin Netanyahu and his Likud party are the most left-leaning party in their government. It also happens to be Israel's largest government ever. Right? We have 37 ministers and vice ministers, which is way, way higher than we've ever had. Having such a far-right government, from an Israeli perspective, we, as a left-leaning Israeli, I criticize it, right? And I kind of say, okay, they're horrible and they're this, they're that, and so forth, but they do not represent me in a sense, I say. I come from a different world of values and so forth. They don't represent me. that's a gutless cop-out. If you live in a democratic system, they represent you if you like them or not.
Yeah.
You voted for your president or you didn't. You can say he doesn't represent you, but it's a cop-out. Of course he represents you. That's the way the system works. And what they say is what Israel says. And our government under Benjamin Netanyahu since last year or the beginning of this year is the most, by far, right-wing government, with the most radical people within Israeli politics. This is the main parties of the government at the moment. Benjamin Netanyahu, he in the last elections won 32 seats, 23.5% of the vote, was the largest party in government. The next guy was the black yarmulke kippah. He is the head of the Sephardic ultra-Orthodox Jews. They do not want to do military service and they do not want to be part of the modern workforce. They want to just study religious texts. And they have 11 seats. On the other edge, you have these two guys, the guy in the white beard and the smiling guy next to him. They're the leaders of the Ashkenazi, European ultra-Orthodox Jewish party, and having very similar goals. They're even more disconnected from the idea of Israel. They would be, the guy in the white beard doesn't even formally recognize the government of Israel as a good thing, and therefore he is not even though he has a lot of power, he's not willing to be a minister, because being a minister would recognize Israel's government. He believes only God's
Any
government.
Russians in this government?
Any Russians?
Yeah,
in
Russian Jews.
Netanyahu's party, they're Russians. The main party is not inside this coalition, but the last one is the two in the center. There's a guy who knows how to tie a tie, and then there's the guy that doesn't know how to tie a tie, right? The guy who knows how to tie a tie, Bezalel Smotrich, he's the Minister of Finance, one of the most important ministries, and he's head of the settler movement. His party heads the settler movement and more of the radical side of the settler movement, very much expansionist in the settlements. For example, when there was that attack where settlers went into this Palestinian village called Hawara and rampaged, murdering a few people and burning almost the whole business district of that village. This guy who knows how to tie his tie said we should have burned Hawara to the ground. And he's a minister. The guy next to him who doesn't know how to tie a tie, he is even more radical. He comes from a party that is one of the only two parties that were made illegal as political parties in Israel. So he rebranded, and his party is called Jewish Power. He's now Minister of Internal Defense, in charge of policing and so forth. Both of these guys were in jail, but not in jail by police mainly, but by our equivalent of the FBI, kind of FBI Secret Service, our internal security services, for being on the verge of what we call Jewish terrorism. He now is the head of the police. The guy that doesn't know how to tie a tie, he said after that attack in Hawara, when he was asked, shouldn't we allow Palestinians to drive through that Palestinian village? And he said to the lady who interviewed him, I'm sorry, miss. He used a different word than miss. But me and my family are worth more than Muhammad, whoever that is, and his family. So these are statements from the top elected officials in Israel. When Palestinians are fearing Israel going towards an place where it will eliminate them, is these people actually say that that's their program. If this government in the elections, you see in the left corner, I added that, they have 64 seats. We have 120. You need 61 to have a majority, but they actually have only 48.5% of the vote. Very similar to elections in the United States because of our peculiarities of our election system. They are the government, even though they did not win a majority of the vote. Let's see what does Netanyahu actually want and what does he actually say.
So, excuse me,
Yeah.
so if there was a different government, how would that have affected October? What happened?
You also have to understand that this guy, Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi, he is prime minister almost non-stop since 2009.
Right.
So he has created what we have. From 2009 to 2023, that's 14 years. And he was also prime minister for one stint before that. Whatever we have today is his strategy. Sometimes a president or a leader does tactic. He reacts to what's happening in a specific way. But once you have such a long reign, you came to power in 2019, you're 14 years in power, almost in one stint. You already create strategy. You decide how things will move forward. So if it would have been a different government, the whole world, our world would be different. Because this has been exactly how he, until the 7th of October, he didn't want the 7th of October. So whatever criticism I have over him, no doubt he didn't want that. But what we had and got to until the 7th of October, just before 6 a.m., that was his doing. And he said what he wants. In 1996, you can see the text on the left, there isn't and won't be a Palestinian state between the Jordan and the sea. There will be no entity, no other entity. Jewish presence, settlement in all Judea and Samaria will live, flourish, and exist forever. He didn't hide this. That's what he said in 1996, first time he was prime minister. In 2015, if I win the elections, there will be no Palestinian state during my term. That's an election promise that he said after the election, right? In 2019, will you take the next step? He was asked in an interview, right? And here you'll understand what the next step is. The answer is yes, he said. We will move on to the next step and we will begin applying Israeli sovereignty over the areas of Judea and Samaria. That means formally annexing Judea and Samaria without giving the Palestinians that live there citizenship. He said this publicly.
But then, everybody should realize that it's unattainable because it's a lack of balance. You just cannot imagine.
No. A lot of this is not unattainable. It is wrong. There's a difference.
Well,
because he doesn't believe that it is
Different
attainable.
categories.
Yeah.
But it's just you cannot. Yeah.
Things hit
Sorry.
from time to time when you have a program. You're going in a way. What one person will say is unattainable, another person will say, I just need to get through that, right?
Yeah.
Theodor Herzl in 1892 said there will be a Jewish state. That was unattainable at that moment in time. But he said, no, if we push forward, it will happen, right? So Netanyahu believed this and said we shouldn't push through. But I'll show you the last text is the one that's in this red kind of background. And sorry, I didn't find a better, picture. But he said in 2019, anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state, this is his prime goal for many years, has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part of our strategy. to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank. This is his strategy. What is the idea there? I do not want there to become a Palestinian state in the West Bank and in Gaza. But the Palestinians in the West Bank have in their jails Hamas operatives in the Palestinian jail, right? So if there is a Hamas operative in a Palestinian jail, that means that the people in the West Bank want to work with Israel. And they want for, in return, more freedoms, a Palestinian state. You can't stop giving that, you can't give them that with Bibi Netanyahu's viewpoint. Therefore, you have to keep Hamas alive. You have to transfer money to them and support them, not to get them strong, but just keep them on a very low fire. Because whenever anybody says to you, you need to do something in order to get closer to the establishment of a Palestinian state, you can always do, voila, look over there, you see Gaza. That is the reason I can never get to a Palestinian state. Those are terrorists.
So basically, it was a very
he keeps Hamas
dangerous.
there
Yeah.
in order not to get closer to a Palestinian state. Sorry, yes, Joanna.
So I say it was a very dangerous strategy, and then obviously proven wrong.
At the moment, it's totally proven wrong, but it wasn't a fluke. This was the strategy. When that is your strategy, sorry, I'll go one. How the heck? That's not going back, whatever. This strategy that he had is what made us not see the 7th of October coming. Because Netanyahu was very successful in making life here in Israel better. Really, my salary has gone up as a middle-class person, right? And life has become better. Tourism has grown, even though there were terrorist attacks, tourists didn't stop coming. Investment didn't stop. He showed successes over this time. And what did he say? I have my hand on the dial of the heat. Gaza needs water, I give them water. Gaza needs work, I'm the one that will allow them to come into Israel or not. Gaza needs fuel, Gaza needs electricity, Gaza needs money, I have my hand on it. And he always said, trust me, my hand is steady on it. I will keep the Hamas just before it can raise its head. And I will stop the West Bank. Turns out you can't keep them like that, right? And just for the shock value, this is our finance minister in a prison guard. This is Israeli prison guard. When he was brought to trial for security concerns, actions and protests that became violent that he organized in the West Bank, and a anti-LGBTQ protest that he held. And he was tried, sat for a short while in Israeli jail.
Yeah.
He is an extremist. And he came out with a very well-organized plan called One Hope, or decisive plan. And it says very clearly we should annex the West Bank without giving people citizenship, end Palestinian hope for a national home, fulfill the biblical promise for a promised land, and tell the Palestinians, if you want to leave, leave. If you want to accept a new reality where Israel fulfills its biblical position, and you accept it, you can live there under certain situations. If you want to make war, we will give you war. And that was his plan, right? One of his members of parliament, a undersecretary, Orit Struk, said, what we are going to be doing now in Gaza is going to be a second Nakba, a second destruction, and pushing all the Palestinians out. So when Palestinians hear this, this is the Israel we many times will gloss over. We'll try and say that's not the real Israel. But that is part of what Israel really is. One more point I want to make before I'll open up, again, we'll see some questions. Bibi's approval ratings at the moment are unbelievably low. We're talking at around the 15% to 20%, depending who you ask. But this is from a survey that came out last week. Around 75% of all Israelis, and it doesn't matter if you're on the left or the center or the right, believe that once the war, the fighting is over, there will be the largest protests in Israel's history. That comes from the left, the center, and the people who support Bibi. It wasn't asking, do you support the protests? Just, do you believe there will be protests? Majority of Israel believes that there will be enormous protests happening.
It's out of turmoil.
This is the protests beginning when Benjamin Netanyahu came to power this time. One of the new things that happened in the protests is that the protesters started wearing flags of Israel. Usually, you'd have flags in protests of the right wing, of Bibi's party, of the settlers. But suddenly the protests against Bibi in this term started taking the Israeli flags. And they weren't only young people, they were old people. They were veterans that were leading a lot of these protests. The protests grew and grew. This was a 200,000 person protest in Jerusalem, all with Israeli flags. Bibi costumes. Bibi is a prisoner.
Oh.
These were protests of over 250,000 people in Tel Aviv from last July. This is because of Bibi's right-wing government, because of all those people in that government.
But you know, Ilan, yes. So all those people in the government, so Sephardi, Ashkenazi, completely right wing, and then basically they don't serve in the military, right?
Right.
Because they study Torah. So who is going? Who do they think is going to fight? Who is going to be in the army? Who is going to fight Palestinians?
It's not a very hard question. You know, it is like somebody that's a pacifist. When you ask him, so what do you do when somebody would come to fight? And he'd say, if everybody was a pacifist, then nobody would fight. They say if everybody would pray to God and follow the Torah, there would be nothing to fight for, okay? Reasons. Karen, you want to ask something?
Yes, I'd like to ask something. I also would like to request that people mute when they're not actively speaking. It's been a lot of weird audio background noise. But Ilan, I want to ask, given across the board, people expecting mass protests, what is Netanyahu's motivation to end this war? He knows that while there's a war, there's probably not going to be much of an effort for to call for new elections or to for people to want to change the government. How does this end?
Then this is the protests of against Netanyahu. So he knows that once he ends the war, this is what's going to happen. And this is a 300,000 person protest in the center, just above the main highway coming through Tel Aviv. As you can see in the picture, there are trucks on the main highway closing it off because the protests are so large, people go down into the roads and clog the main artery of road in Israel. This is all against Netanyahu, right? Big flag with an SOS on it. And Netanyahu also knows that if he stops the war, the moment he stops the war, this is what waits for him. Now the polls are showing that this guy on the left, Benny Gantz, who leads at the moment the second largest opposition party, but he's an ex-chief of staff. And the other two people who are the top three in his party were all ex-chiefs of staff of the military. He's going to go up from 14 seats, according to the polls, to 41. And Netanyahu is going to go down from 32 seats to 18. I made this pie chart. Anything from this 43 seats to Gantz, 14 to his partner, Yair Lapid, 8 for the Russian vote, 10 for the Arab vote, 4 more here for the Green vote, make the opposition of today 79 seats versus Netanyahu 41 seats. Netanyahu knows the moment that this war ends, the protests will be much larger than they ever were, and at the moment that the elections will come close, this is more or less what he's facing. It might change a bit, but his coalition is lost, right? I'll add to it. Do you know when you will know that this, you might have seen today in the news, Biden has been putting more pressure on Israel, both for having less civilians hurt. Both for less civilians hurt, and 27,000 guns, assault rifles that were ordered from United States manufacturers were stopped by the US DOD because there was Israel wasn't willing to say that these guns will not go to settlers. And the DOD demanded that none of these guns go to settlers. What you're going to see in the next couple of days and probably next couple of weeks, you will probably see Benjamin Netanyahu starting to criticize Joe Biden and the American government. Because Netanyahu knows if he stops the fighting, he's out. And I'll add, at the moment there's a trial that's running for Netanyahu. And the trial is running in the courthouse that is exactly next to where there are the tents, these kind of outdoor tents that are put there for the protesters of the families of the kidnapped people. They're just outside of the courthouse. He knows that if he stops the war, that happens. But he also knows that he can't continue the war if the United States doesn't back him. And the United States has already been passing on signals. We will stop backing you in the same way that we are. For many reasons, and the easiest one to mention is the political reason. It's an election year. Biden needs this to be over by January 1st, to have 10 months for the American left to forget he was so close to Israel. And what Netanyahu will do that moment, he will turn around and start blaming Biden for stopping Netanyahu from doing everything he could do, from truly vanquishing the Hamas. When you start to hear that, you know that it's going to start to move. And I'll share the last thing and then I'll just open it up. But I actually wanted to put this up. An elastic moment. This is this Martin Indyk statement. There are moments that things reshuffle. Israeli government is going to reshuffle. The politics of Israel has totally reshuffled. Polls show a switch of about 30% in the electorate moving from one side to another. That's unthinkable. The last elections were not even a year ago. Such a shift. It's incredible. The issues that Israel has to deal with its internal politics are at an end. This is what we call an elastic moment, because also what's happening in Gaza is monumentous. Hamas is going to be out of the picture soon enough because Israel does that. So what does this elastic moment allow us? One, to eliminate Hamas and its military capabilities. And that no matter who's Israel's government after the 7th of October, that's something that will happen. If not in 2 months, in 2 years, in slower operations, in incursions, but Hamas will be run out of Gaza. Second thing that is an opportunity and Bibi is not willing to do is to join regional powers in order to reshape and rebuild Gaza. He's willing to join regional powers like the Abraham Accords, but he's not willing to do what the regional powers demand in order to reshape the geopolitics of the Middle East, which is to rebuild Gaza. Qatar, Saudi are dying to take out money on rebuilding Gaza. The last thing, and probably the most important thing, is to put dialogue and diplomacy at the center of the conflict. Bibi Netanyahu, in his long reign, has put the whole issue of the Palestinians only into a military context, only into war, only into fighting or containing or deterring, never to talking. It doesn't mean that if we talk, Kumbaya comes the next day. But you change the way you deal with things if you start talking. Create dialogue, diplomacy, and dialogue and diplomacy around issues of settlement reduction, greater role to the Palestinian Authority, and territorial concessions. Because if you want the Palestinians to choose not just violence, you have to give diplomacy and dialogue and brownie points. You have to give something to somebody who's willing to just talk. And what do they want? Give them more authority in specific areas. Give agricultural areas to direct Palestinian control. Reduce the ability of settlements to affect the lives in that way. Remove outpost settlements who are just one hill. This is me spilling the beans and giving you already my personal view. Right? This is no longer, me looking at it neutrally. This is my personal view. I'll stop here and let's see if we have questions more around this. Anyone, whoever would like, you are welcome to unmute yourself and just ask a question.
Well, Ilan, there are those, unmistakable parallels between United States and Trump movement and Netanyahu and Israel. And you just, hope for rationality, but sometimes it's just so hard to control, right? And because when you talk about now Netanyahu and Biden, and Netanyahu may be turning against Biden, well, first of all, Hamas actually seems to be influencing world opinion. Everybody sees children dying in Gaza, right? And this is really terrible publicity for the war, right? And so Trump is staying kind of in the background, but then he always was actually friendly with Netanyahu. He was much more friendly than Biden ever was. So I just wonder how those twists in politics will
These are
turn.
always the unknowns, right? In a sense, Netanyahu's plan before the 7th of October was to wait and hope for a new Trump presidency or a Republican presidency that would be easier for him to deal with. Democrat presidents have always pushed Israel more. But he has been pushed into a moment where he can't wait anymore. He can't just sit and wait for the elections. And the second point is, when the United States got involved in the conflict, and we'll talk about it much more in the next session, when the United States got involved in the conflict, it did something it had never done before. The US has donated or given enormous amounts of military aid always, or at least from the late 60s. Enormous. Israel gets over $3 billion direct military aid per year from the United States. But this time, he said, I'm sending my people over. Secretary of State was in the military cabinet meetings in Israel. You don't allow somebody from the outside, never mind how much a friend they are, to sit in on the most secret military planning. And we did it with the US. The US demanded it, said, we want to know exactly what's happening. What are you doing? How are you doing it? And that you will give us on the down low. Outside, we will give you an enormous hug. And that's what Biden did. Gave an enormous hug to Israel. But on the down low, he's involved in everything. This friend of mine who's an Air Force pilot, I'm probably not allowed to say this, but he was last week in Belgium bringing in armaments into Israel that were brought from whatever. The US has supplies in Belgium. We started getting tank shells. 27,000 tank shells were brought to Israel. We don't buy from the US tank shells. When we need tank shells, that means that we need everything from the US. And that was Biden's plan. Because then he can slowly take away. That you won't know. I won't know it. Benjamin Netanyahu will. And
so in the sense, it was stolen from Ukraine.
But when you think about it also, Israel was never really committed to condemning Putin in war in Ukraine. It was always kind of friendly.
That has to do, we can talk about it next week, next session, because we'll talk also about the larger ramifications, Israel versus Ukraine, Russia, and so forth. It's very easy when you're the strongest country in the world to say, I talk or don't talk with that one. For a smaller country, you need to make lots of decisions about what you buy from which country and what can you say. Turkey has been very vocal against Israel, but it's our single largest trading partner in the area. Sorry, I heard somebody else wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, going back and just changing the subject, is there ever a possibility that Israel is not going to be attacked from some Arab state, from some Palestinian group? I mean, I'm reading a book about the formation of Israel. And it's just one attack or after the other one.
It's to answer that question, this is how I answer it. I don't know if it's the right way to answer.
No right or wrong.
All depends on what slice of history you take. If we take the slice of history for the last 100 years, I can trace a story of rising tension between Jews and Palestinians, and specifically Jews and Muslims. If I take instead of that a 500-year piece of history from today till the year 1500, the vast majority of that period, Jews and Muslims had much better relationship than Jews and Christians. So it always has to do with how we parse it. Can Jews and Arabs and Muslims live together well? Obviously, yes. The way that we know it is because throughout the majority of history, they lived much better than they lived with Christians. Yes, it is a possibility. But like we lived under Netanyahu's rule and we all believed that we can keep Hamas on the low burner all the time. You can rule it and keep it low. And we couldn't even believe how much anger there's on the other side that will provoke their religious fanaticism to attack the way they did on the 7th of October. If we start thinking in a way that says we can sit and talk with them, then we'll be able to get there. Let me remind you, in 1945, I'm sorry if I'll be offensive, but Christian Germany, not Muslim Algeria, not Shiite Iran, Christian Germany perpetrated the biggest massacre against the Jews ever, the Holocaust. And Germans are probably our strongest allies in Europe today. The largest community of expat Israelis that left Israel, except the United States, is in Germany today. Can Jews and Palestinians live together? Yes. Will it be easy? No. But we can get there. But I see Rick wanted to ask a question.
Yes, thanks, Ilan. My understanding was the protests were largely focused on the limits that Netanyahu wanted to place on the Supreme Court, which was such a fundamental attack on democracy. Is some of this polling result because of that, this shift, that as well as October 7th? And is this the new group that would take over going to protect the Supreme Court, do you think? And what impact do you think that's going to have on the future of Israel?
Yeah, you're totally right. The beginning of the set of protests that happened after Netanyahu's last government had to do with the changing of the legal system in Israel, the place of the Supreme Court, the place of different legal bodies and their power. But that is the last iteration of the protests against Netanyahu. There have been protests against Netanyahu for years, from the time before his government in 2011, even before he was Minister of Finance. There were protests against his cuts. Netanyahu is a very divisive figure, and there were protests about his monetary position. There were big protests about his corruption trials. There were big protests about his, this is me exaggerating. There were a lot of small protests about his dealings with Palestinians. There were a lot of protests with how he deals with the ultra-Orthodox. And the largest protests happened when he decided to change the judicial system. Why does he change the judicial system? Because the things that his partners want to do are illegal in a world that puts equality as a very high standard. His settler partners cannot do what they want in the settlements because equality is still a judicial rule. The ultra-Orthodox can't keep not joining the military because of equality as a central rule, and so forth. So he wanted to change that. That brought all of the other protests together and new crowds into that protest. So before the 7th of October, Netanyahu's position wasn't good. He won the elections because of a fluke. Two parties didn't pass 3.25% of the general vote. If you do not pass 3.25, all those votes get canceled. Sorry, not canceled. They get counted as a zero. So it drops the all around, whatever. This is election math. It bored me as I started talking. But that fluke created a situation that those two parties were one Arab party and the Green Party, both on the left wing. So the left wing dropped 6% of its votes, and that's why Netanyahu won. Even before the 7th of October, Netanyahu was 48.6% versus 51.4% for the left of Netanyahu's parties. We're moving in Israel. We can feel that change. I can't tell you exactly how the blocks were to lie, but there are some things that are very clear. Netanyahu will not be able to continue his hold on the prime ministership for very long. It might be months, it might be even a long couple of months. But I do not see a way that Netanyahu will be able to hold over the next 6 months. And now we're going to start seeing the reservists be let out. We have around 330,000 reservists pulled in. These are young people. These are the protesters. I don't know if I told you this, but yesterday or a day before yesterday, Netanyahu came to a army base in the south of Israel that is the search and rescue command of the Air Force. And the majority of the soldiers in that base were reservists. So Netanyahu's aides came to that base and told all the reservists, you have to leave the base. Because Netanyahu is coming to talk to the soldiers. And he doesn't want to be talking to the reservists because the reservists would protest him in front of his face. So he had to remove everybody from the base and have only a group of about 15 young soldiers. The moment, this is costing us enormous amounts of money. Enormous. We are talking about somewhere around 200 billion shekels, something like that. It's an enormous sum for Israel. It's exacerbated because these people are not working. We will have to let them go. The moment they're let go, that means that we can fight less. It means that we have to get to a point where we show some sort of victory, and we won't have a big enough victory to show. And these people will come home and ask, why did I fight if I didn't topple the Hamas or return all the refugees, all the kidnappees back? And the protests that will erupt, everybody in Israel knows, will be humongous. He will have a limited amount of time. That's when you'll see Biden being badmouthed by Netanyahu. Hope that answered the question. Now I remember there was a question before I started speaking.
Okay, Ilan, but this is also another problem. Netanyahu knows that as long as the war is going on, he's in power. And then he knows that he probably has to go, and then we'll face all the, problems, legal problems that he has. So he's a desperate man. So he may be devising different ways to.
I have very little positive to say about Netanyahu personally. In my political view, I think he, for so many reasons, has been a horrible prime minister for a long time. However, he's not Dr. Evil. He's not one man that rules everything as much as he tries to be. You cannot pursue a war just because Netanyahu says so. It's just impossible. And the moment the United States backs down, the United States isn't here with its military power to stop what's happening in Gaza. The United States military, 2 fleets are here in order to stop Tehran. To stop Lebanon, Hezbollah, and Tehran. That's why they're here. The fleet moves away a little bit Netanyahu cannot control it, the situation. You can't keep a war constantly. In the end, I'm not willing to live in a country that I have to pay $1,500 for a flight to London, which was about $300 before the war. That's what it is now. This is untenable, right? He can't continue pursuing the war forever. You just can't do it. Yeah. And we could, after the war, we kept the reservists on reserve duty for 4.5 months. We could do that in 1973. No problem. Israel wasn't a very highly developed country, and people were willing to live off of less. Nobody had good espresso in Israel in 1973. Today, I expect still to get shipments of the really nice espresso that I get. I still expect to be able to buy crap off the internet. I expect to, at some point, go and see a music show of some big ticket name. I expect things that's different in 1973. I cannot hold reservists for that long. Netanyahu has 3 to 4 weeks left for this level of intensity. Guys, I do want to let you also go at some point. So let's collect the last questions. Feel free if anybody has a question.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. My first thought is a little bit philosophic. And it is that Jews and Arabs are just brothers from another mothers. And why do you guys fight instead of being a family? This is one thing. Second thing is that I think the people who suffer most of this situation in Israel and Gaza are Ukrainians, because suddenly the world forgot about what's going on in Ukraine, and what's going on in Ukraine will decide about the world in next couple of years. I had a fourth one, but third one,
He forgot.
but I forgot.
Thank God. Okay.
Next time that we meet, the next session, we'll also talk about the larger implications, and the war in Ukraine is a very big part of this. And it has many of the reasons for what's US involvement here as well has to do with the war in Ukraine. And philosophically, I agree with you. It's Jews call Arabs colloquially cousins. Even if you want to ask somebody, is that person Arab, but you don't want to ask it in that way, right? Because that would be uncouth. You'd say to somebody, is that a cousin? So we all know that there's a very close kinship. And like the great holiday of Thanksgiving teaches us all, right? Kinship doesn't mean that you have to love your siblings or your mother-in-law, right? Being in a very small place, very tight, like this, brings a lot of tensions. It can bring lots of creativity as well. But at the moment, it's bringing tension. We need lots of resets here. That's, yeah.
Elon, what do you think Iran's role in both the Hamas attack and how it seems like they are benefiting from the divisiveness that is being caused by the conflict. It seems like it's kind of playing into their playbook.
Yeah. Okay, let's look at it in two fronts. The 7th of October as a specific attack, a terrorist or military operation. We know very clearly Iran trained the Nukhba force, the elite force of Hamas. They must have given logistical support. We know that a lot of the technology that's being used by the Hamas, the rockets and so forth, are Iranian technology. Hamas have drones, not our type of drones, but drones. We know that they'll pop out of a tunnel in Gaza with a drone above them to see if there are any soldiers, and only then, and so forth. So there's a lot of Iranian help there. It's very obvious that the Iranians did not know in advance that the 7th of October is going to happen as it happened and when it happened. Very simply by their utter shock. Secondly, by not willing to engage directly. And thirdly, after 2 months, if the Iranians would have ordered this, believe me, that evidence would be found and it would be all over the news. So that's specifically. But Iran and the Hamas, there's a very strong link. Even though, if we would go to the world of understanding Islam, everybody knows Sunni is one type of Islam, Shia is the other, and they hate each other. Within the Sunni-Shia divide, there could be no worse divide between Shia and Muslim Brotherhood. And they are great friends here, specifically in this place, right? So what is the story with this? And we'll talk about it in the next session, but to shortly put it, Iran is the big counterweight in the Middle East to the oil-rich countries and to Israel. So Iran is the main counterweight there. And it's trying to show its political dominance. They believe themselves to be the great Persian nation. They want to have clout around the area. And one way is to get nuclear weapons, and then you have deterrence from others. If they couldn't get that because Israel assassinated over a dozen Iranian scientists in their houses, because Israel has done so many spying and this and that and that and that. So they try to work through the Hezbollah in Lebanon. And they try to work through Hamas in Gaza. So even though this isn't directly ordered by Iran, this goes into Iranian interests. This is the way that Iran says, you kill my scientists at home, you kill my second in command of the military at home. I try to attack you here and there unsuccessfully because Israel's Mossad is so good against a big country that needs a lot of communication, and we can get all of this communication easily. We will fund Hamas and they will attack you. So this is also part of what happened on the 7th of October, is Iran saying that's the payback, unfortunately. Okay, kiddos.
Mossad failed in Gaza?
Sorry?
Mossad failed in Gaza? It was so good with Iran and it failed in Gaza?
Luckily for the Mossad.
Oh, it was on purpose.
Luckily for the Mossad, they are not in charge of Gaza. Gaza is within the remit of another body called the Shin Bet, the Internal Security Services. Mossad just works only outside of the borders of Israel. And as Israel kind of still has control over Gaza, it's under the Shin Bet and the military intelligence. So that's the only espionage body that went slightly less scathed. They do have a responsibility over what is the intent of the Hamas leaders who are sitting in Qatar, Lebanon, and Turkey. And even there they go.
No, this is another story that all those great Hamas leaders are not in Gaza, but they are somewhere else, and then letting their people suffer.
Yes. Okie dokie, kiddos. I'm
You are ready to go to sleep.
gonna sign off. Yeah. I'm
Don't
not gonna have another
drink
coffee.
coffee.
No more coffee until the morning. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for all the patience and the interest and the questions. I'm overjoyed. It's gonna take
Thank you,
me.
Ilan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alon.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ilana. It's so
Thank-
nice to see you.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you, Ilan.
Thank you.
Ilan.
Thank you.